Hey everybody, Tom Barnes, Stories from the 78. Here I am in South Edgebrook neighborhood going through some archives. And because it is the Christmas season, I figured I'd dive into one of my favorite stories I ever done. And it was about the essence of Christmas, where it came from, and the whole thing. Check it out.
Thank you for joining me. And Judith wrote this book. It's called Christmas, a biography. Oh, let me get it in the frame there. And I'll make sure I put this up in a nice fancy graphic. But there's the book. And the reason why I prompted myself to reach out to you, Judith, is because my family and I, after watching a random Christmas movie on one of the streaming platforms, wanted to know more about Christmas. And we looked at documentaries because it seems like documentaries are everywhere these days. Hardly could not find anything about Christmas, which led me to your book. So I imagine you fell knee deep into where Christmas started and how it became what it is today, but it's got a very interesting past on where it started, right?
Well, I think probably the reason you couldn't find anything and the reason there isn't much is my basic rule of thumb after working on this subject for, about 20 minutes was everything anyone tells you about Christmas is not true.
Right. And that's crazy to me.
Start from the point of view that it's not true and you're safe.
So what is true about Christmas?
Basically, the nativity as the birthday of Christ is simply not mentioned with a specific date in the New Testament. We simply do not know when it was. There are different thoughts about when it might be. The fact that shepherds were watching their flocks at night does suggest it's not winter time. There are all sorts of biblical scholarly discussions about that, but we do not know. What we do know is that the choosing of the date for Christmas by the early church was probably because there were a bunch of holidays already at that time of year. And so it was kind of a festive season already. Also in Southern Europe at the time, the birthplace of early Christianity, in that region, you're looking at December being the quiet season in terms of work, in terms of an agricultural community. You've had all your harvest, you've killed all the animals you're going to kill for the winter. You've got your grapes in or your beer or whatever it is, wherever you live. So now there's really not much to do until spring.
Right.
So it's a good time of year for holidays. You've got this storehouse of food and drink, and you haven't got much for your workers to do. So the idea is that Christmas, as far as we know it, has always been a holiday of consumption. Today, it's presents, it's gifts, it's in the past, before the Industrial Revolution, before mass production, it was a holiday of food and drink. The earliest Christmas we know of came in the 4th century. And within a few decades of that first Christmas, we already have an archbishop complaining that his flock isn't spending enough time at church on Christmas. They're spending too much time feasting and drinking and dancing.
Right. That was kind of the way it was. It was almost like gluttony almost, right? Where people were celebrating and the church frowned on it, to the point where parts of England or London, I can't remember from when I read the book, but they kind of banned Christmas for a little bit in some of the aisles.
That's a different story. That happens in the 17th century when you get the rise of the Protestant sects. Because Christmas is not biblically mandated, therefore Christmas is not a legitimate religious holiday to some Christian sects, mostly Protestant. Indeed, the Puritans in New England thought you should work on Christmas Day. It is not a religiously mandated holiday. And so indeed in the state, in then not yet the states, of course, the colonies in Britain, not yet Britain, but England, Scotland, and Ireland, it is in places banned in the 17th century. And one of the charming things I found out was that in Scotland, they forgot to overturn that rule. And so Christmas was actually officially banned until the 1950s. I mean, nobody paid any attention, but they just forgotten to overturn the law. And so for
Christmas
250
banned.
years, Christmas was technically illegal in Scotland.
Unbelievable. And I didn't realize that Christmas had such a cloudy past, right? Like I didn't realize that it was a lot of all these traditions all over Europe, that one little thing became this little thing that this person heard from over here it was through travels and seeing people and how they celebrated, kind of adopting all of these things, because like, as you were speaking to earlier about the, December being a good month, they had the months where I believe they were, celebrating the god of agriculture, Jupiter, like those were like the gods that they were celebrating at that time. And it kind of all rolled.
There are two Roman religious holidays in December that were merged together. One was Saturn, one was the invincible sun, Mithras, who is indeed officially, supposedly born on the 25th of December. So those two merged, and then in January, the new year. So you have all of these holidays together. And then through the centuries, what you get, as you say, everyone has their own little traditions. What enchanted me was this absolute conviction everyone has that their own customs are the real customs. Everyone else, we don't really, if they want to do that, they can do that. Right. But everyone believes that whatever they eat, however they celebrate, that is the real way to do it.
And odds are somebody just made it up. They got it from somebody else, or they did this and they said, this is how we're going to do it. And that's how a lot of traditions are kind of born out of learning from others.
You can guarantee with Christmas, everything's made up.
That just to me is crazy. I mean, not to mention, we haven't even gotten to the man with the red suit, but even that, how does Saint Nick and Santa Claus find its way into the Christmas holiday?
Well, that's very interesting, because you have how St. Nicholas turns into Santa Claus is a very puzzling question that we don't really know the answer to, because the story we're told that comes from Washington Irving, that comes from those other early 19th century New York writers, they're made up. Don't tell anyone, but they're made up.
Unbelievable.
Washington Irving writes, for example, that St. Nicholas is the patron saint of Old Amsterdam, the old Dutch New York, and that the first church that was built in New York was named for the patron saint, St. Nicholas. Tiny little catch there, the Dutch Reformed Church in New Amsterdam is Protestant. There are no saints.
Oh, geez.
Small
Are you
catch.
kidding?
The
small little flaw in that
tiny
plan.
catch. The first church named for St. Nicholas in New York isn't built till the 20th century. Another small little catch.
Yeah.
So it's all made up. And these are all stories that were invented. And they're good stories. We believe them.
Right. And it brings, go ahead.
Well, how we move from St. Nicholas to Santa Claus is a really interesting question. Yeah. And it's a question that we don't really have an answer to. Washington Irving and his friends invented this St. Nicholas tradition at the beginning of the 19th century. From about 1809 to about 1840 is the great creation of the myth. So things like "'Twas the Night Before Christmas" is written, right, and all of those stories.
Relatively young in history.
What we have is in the 1790s, in a New York newspaper, there are 3 separate references to Santa Claus.
Interesting.
We don't know what they mean. We don't know how they got there. We don't know what they refer to. It's before Washington Irving. It's before he's born.
Wow. And nobody knows.
Nobody knows. And indeed, until we could do stuff like digital newspaper searching, we didn't even know they were there because it's in some obscure newspaper. And it doesn't happen on either St. Nicholas's Day, the 6th of December, or the 25th of December. This event that they
really, it's just randomly placed.
It's in December. So there are these questions we don't know the answer to. My own guess, and it's a guess, is that in Switzerland, the German-Swiss name in some regions for St. Nicholas, the patron saint of children, whose saint's day is indeed on the 6th of December, is Santi Claus, Chlaus. And there was big Swiss immigration to the States, not particularly to New York, usually further south, but it did happen. So my wondering is, maybe this is a Swiss thing.
Interesting. I feel like a lot of American traditions are born from all overseas that came here. You got intermingling cultures and, oh, that's great. Let's add this to that and add this to that. And then you have Santa Claus, you have Christmas trees. We haven't gotten to the Christmas tree part. Where does that come from in the whole thing?
And there's this whole thing of we have to go back to the real customs. And I always want to say, well, some of the real customs were like wearing a goat's head skeleton on your head. Is that what you're talking about? I don't think so.
No.
I don't remember that in my childhood, quite frankly.
No.
And the Christmas tree. Just like people will tell you, Santa Claus got his red suit from the Coca-Cola ads in the 1930s, which, again, yet another thing that is not true. He's already been wearing red for about 50 years by this stage. The idea, what people are told in England, is that the German custom of the Christmas tree is brought over to England by Prince Albert, Queen Victoria's husband, who is German. This too is not true.
Oh, good gosh. So Coca-Cola not true, and this so is it very American to say, oh, the Coca-Cola company did it, look at us and how wonderful we are? Yeah, okay. It's okay, I'm American, I get it. But you said in the tree the same thing. So is there any roots on where the tree came from, or where Santa started wearing red?
I saw what you did there with the roots.
Thanks.
Great. What we know about the tree is it is a German custom. It starts in the 14th and 15th century. The 24th of December is the feast day of Adam and Eve. And there was a fashion in the 14th and 15th century for a kind of outdoor play that told the story of Adam and Eve and the expulsion from the Garden of Eden. And of course, if you're in Germany, in Northern Europe, trying to do a play about a tree with fruit in it in December, you're kind of out of luck.
Right, yeah, it's cold.
But what they would do is they would take a fir tree and they would tie apples to it. So you would get this outdoor decorated tree. The fashion for these plays disappeared. It was, it lasted for a while and then it vanished. But people really liked the decorated trees, so they kept them. And we know that in the 16th and 17th centuries in Germany, there were outdoor trees. By the early 17th century, in about 1605, I think, we have a record of the first decorated indoor tree in Germany. So we know it goes back that far. And then gradually, as the Germans traveled, they took this custom with them. So in England in the late 18th century, in the 1780s, 1790s, we hear about German merchants mostly having trees decorated, say the English, in the German fashion. And in the colonies, very soon to become the states, there was a lot of immigration of German, particularly Moravians. They were a Protestant sect who went to North Carolina, who went to Pennsylvania, and all along the coast. And we have reports of them having decorated. Often they were called pyramids, and they were like wooden boards, and then they decorated them with greenery, tree branches. So we know these existed, and again, they were called German.
Interesting.
So they came from German immigrants. And then gradually, you know, like us, people liked them. So they began to do them themselves. And what's fascinating is how quickly people just assume everyone knows what a Christmas tree. Much longer ago, it was said that that you left out carrots for Odin's horse as the Norse gods ride across the sky at the solstice.
So is that how Santa starts to fly? Is that where the origins
we don't know how
story?
Santa starts to fly. And by the way, the carrots too. I mean, there's another thing that isn't quite true, because carrots didn't come to Europe until much later. But we'll move right along again. We don't know why Santa starts to fly and who invented that. In 1840, there's a children's book, an American children's book. And for the first time, Santa is on the roof, and sort of, so he's going to go down the chimney the way we know it. And there are reindeer, and we have no idea how the reindeer got into the story.
So somebody just made it up?
Somebody just made it up, and everyone thought, hey, cool, reindeer.
And I heard even more so that that's how Rudolph got made up. It was somebody wanted to do something where it's like, well, now there's Rudolph. Well, originally there was only so many reindeer, and now there's Rudolph because of a song and because of advertisement in America.
Well, the original reindeer show up in the Clement Clarke Moore poem from the early 19th century, was The Night Before Christmas, Went All Through the House. And if you remember, there's Donder and Blitzen and whatever their names are. Sorry about that. I blanked on their names. But there is no Rudolph.
Right.
And in the 20th century, in the middle of the 20th century, there's a store chain called Montgomery Ward.
Started here in Chicago.
Started there. Of course it did. I'd forgotten about that.
Yeah, and so did Sears.
And they put out a little kids book. Some guy in the Montgomery Ward publicity department writes for their customers this little story, which they publish as a little pamphlet to be given away to customers. And it's the story of Rudolph. It's the story we know. And that's the end of it. I mean, nothing much happens. You know, the customers go, hey, thanks, and wander away and buy or don't buy.
Sure.
But the brother-in-law of this man is a songwriter. And he takes this story and he writes a song called Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer.
Unbelievable.
And it is sung by Gene Autry, the singing cowboy.
Yeah.
And becomes a huge hit, and consequently, the story takes off.
And hence why there's a Rudolph in my yard, right, as we speak. It's about to turn on as the sun sets here in Chicago. Incredible stories. I mean, it's just so mesmerizing how much we think is tradition and customary is just hundreds of stories that have kind of morphed into this time of year. Like, why do you think it happened that way, where it's the time, you know, it's the end of the year, is it celebrating, and then people wanting more to celebrate than just that? Because now, you know, then somehow the Catholic Church gets involved and it becomes this big religious thing, at least for Catholics, because I can speak from that point of view, where, you know, you have midnight mass and you have all this. Like, when did that become when did the religion aspect come a hold?
Well, the religion aspect is there the whole time, but mostly people think it's an excuse for eating and drinking. The church is always trying to keep up. So what the church is doing is it takes on the elements and incorporates them. I'm not saying this cynically.
No, I understand.
It's a perfectly valid thing. But for instance, when Christmas trees start to become popular in the 19th century, you very quickly see that Sunday schools begin to have Christmas trees, or the ladies' church auxiliary groups have Christmas tree raffles or charity draws or whatever. So it becomes incorporated into the church.
Almost adapting.
Yeah,
just adapting.
You have this fascinating thing because Christmas carols are a very, very, very late thing. They don't happen until really the 19th century outside of Germany.
Interesting.
And what happens is in the 19th century, these songs which have previously been for the people and not considered to be elegant or stylish, something a little bit embarrassing, suddenly they become popular. So you suddenly see ministers or ministers' wives or other people writing religious Christmas carols that previously hadn't been. And you have this fascinating thing happen. Christmas carols in England are only incorporated into church services from about the 1870s, 80s.
Wow.
At which point they tell you they're traditional. And there's a carol service that's given at Cambridge University every year, at King's College, Cambridge every year, which is in England very famous. It's broadcast on the BBC. It only starts at the beginning of the 20th century.
Incredible.
I think it was 6 years, after the first broadcast, the first concert. It had been broadcast on the BBC. The BBC is publicizing it by telling you it had been performed for 500 years.
Just 500 years. Sounds right.
It was when the chapel was built.
Oh, so
they say they've been singing it as long as the chapel's been there. Well, either that or 6 years. 5 years, 600, there's not much difference.
Oh my gosh.
I think the thing I like the best in England, they serve Christmas pudding, which is this incredibly dense ball of stuff with dried fruit and a lot of booze in it.
Yeah.
And I think it's kind of disgusting.
Okay.
And I found before there was Christmas pudding, it was called plum pudding, and before it was called plum pudding, it was called plum soup, and it was liquid.
Oof.
It was kind of a broth.
Okay.
And my favorite thing I think I found was a 18th century Swiss traveler who is writing a book about his travels in England, and he writes about this thing that he discovered called plum soup. Or ultimately plum porridge. And he says, if you're not English, you won't like it. And I thought, you bet.
Yeah, right? Oh my gosh. And again, looking at the grand scope of things, what do you feel like, so there's, Charles Dickens wrote about what he wrote about, and that perpetuated Christmas to another level. And then, there's the Rudolph song that brought it to this other level. And then movies in the 50s, 60s, in the 80s, there's, what culture do you think has put Christmas from here and put it up here? Is it collective? Is it English, Americanized? Like what have you just seen in your opinion that has really catapulted it?
I don't think I think it is this gradual growth, because it's very interesting. I mean, that there are lots of essays or books about Dickens and Christmas. And I think there is somewhere a book called, The Man Who Invented Christmas. And I actually sat for a month or so with this database of about 250 newspapers, counting the number of times Christmas is mentioned from the 18th century. I mean, who says I don't know how to have a good time?
Right. Yeah. That's a good Saturday night.
Oh, yeah. It was a lot of fun.
With your porridge, your plum porridge.
Right, and you just see this gradual rise. And partly, I think it is as standards of living improve and as the mass market takes hold, as mass production becomes a thing, so that even people without enormous amounts of money can afford to buy their children toys. You see this change. But what's fascinating is in things like Dickens's A Christmas Carol, which is written in the 1840s, before it really has a grip. There are no toys mentioned. When Scrooge performs at the end, he doesn't buy toys for the children. No. He buys food.
Yeah, Big Goose, I think.
Buys a big goose, exactly. Yeah. So, and also that thing that I always loved is he buys it on Christmas Day. The shops are still open.
Right, that's true. Yeah.
So it's a slow thing as it happens, but you get this thing. You get the change that comes with fewer children dying. Child mortality figures improve. So instead of families with 10 children, of whom 4 or 5 might reach adulthood, you have people now who have 2 or 3 children, or maybe 4 or 5. And with luck, they'll all reach adulthood. So you want to invest in them. You want to buy them things. You want to buy them books to improve themselves. You want to buy them toys to make them happy. You have this change that comes. And then, as I say, you can start to afford more toys, even if, say, you're a factory worker. Gradually, toys become much less expensive. You can afford to buy little Timmy a lead soldier or whatever it is, a toboggan.
Absolutely. And that, I feel like that's where we're at with Christmas now. I mean, here in Chicago, there's a radio station that starts playing Christmas music before Thanksgiving here in the States. And they play it and it's the most listened to station every time of year, at this time of year, I should say. #1 station, people listen to it. The Hallmark is 24/7 with Christmas movies. And there's people like me interviewing people like you talking about Christmas. I appreciate your time this afternoon. I know it's the holidays, and I really do appreciate you taking time to chat with me. For people who want to read your work, obviously they can buy your book right here. They can buy it. Where would you like them to purchase if they're going to buy your book, Judith?
A bookstore.
A bookstore. That's what I thought you would say.
Give the bookstore business.
Yeah, you can find it at Anderson's here in Chicago, the bookseller in certain neighborhoods in Chicago. And Judith, if they want to follow you on any social media or websites, why don't you give it out there?
I'm very loudmouthed on Twitter, Judith Flanders.
Judith Flanders. Thank you very much. And I hope you have a wonderful holiday season celebrating your traditions and whatever they may be.
And you.
All right, so there you have it. TomBarneyChicago@gmail.com if you have a story from the 78 suggestion. Otherwise, head over to the website storiesfromthe78.com. We'll see you later. Thanks.